What the fuck is up, everybody? I'm starting off hot tonight. We got some awesome things to talk about. I'm excited. Cease is excited. We hadn't done a show in like freaking long time. He had to do a show by himself. I'm back. I'm not dead. I've risen. Well, I died. I rose again. And here I am. But yeah, I'm so excited to be doing a show with you, Cease, again. And I'm especially excited for this video, mainly because it takes some heat off myself, because I'm supposed to have done editing for a video that we've been working on, and I've been trying to figure it out. Let's put it that way. So hopefully we'll get that done. So we're going to kind of suffice here with just a general overview on presuppositionalism and kind of our thoughts on it, and some objections. Just pretty much anything goes in this live stream. But yeah, I'm going to, like always, send it to Cease, get your kind of thoughts, how you've been throughout the week, and yeah, we can move on from there.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm really glad you're back as well. I've been itching to do a show for a little while now. I know you were away getting some things done, but this is my favorite thing to do at this point, so I'm glad you're back.
Me as well. I love doing the show, and so sadly you guys are stuck with us for probably until we die, or one of us dies. So
hopefully that wouldn't be anytime soon.
Or if we go broke and we can't like pay for our internet or something, then in that case maybe. But
can you imagine if one of us dies next week? How creepy!
That would be weird. You know, you never know.
But anyway, yeah, presuppositionalism is probably the approach that I despise the most from theists. And I think it's not an accident that you don't really find this line of argument when you go into the field of philosophy, whether it's academia or in a more professional context. It's not something that you run into very often because it's, I think, so clearly problematic on so many ways. But I think I've said this to you before on YouTube, and especially Discord, you run into a lot of that kind of perspective. And I think I said this before, but Discord is like a cesspool of pseudo-intellectual nonsense. That's why I try to stay away from that as much as I can. And so, I think I'm excited to go over why I think.
Well, can I say something about the Discord thing real quick? I just want to mention it's very interesting with how many people, love philosophy on there or argue philosophy, but don't know how to argue like a philosopher. Like the first thing that comes first is put your emotions, in front of you apparently, and get really mad and call people like horrible things whenever you don't believe the same thing as them. I never understood that. There's a big guy in the community, I will leave nameless, that I went back and forth on some YouTube comments because instead of him saying, hey, I disagree with you, he was just like, he said, this is akin to a flat earther giving a physics lesson. Like, that is a dick thing to say to somebody who, like, it was a disagreement about agnostic and atheist. It wasn't a big topic. And so I see that on Discord a lot. I just wanted to go on a wrestling promo about that because that's really bothered me in the last few days. So, yeah. But anyway.
So I gave a shout out to Wither and Britt for coming by.
Oh yeah, of course. So yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Did you want to finish that, or did you want to go straight into it?
No, let's go straight into it. I guess how would you want to start?
I guess we'll define it. I mean, sure. For people that kind of don't know, I like the idea of, there's certain people I've seen discuss this, and I think contrasting it to other approaches is a good way to kind of separate it on its own. So like you would have your standard evidentialism approach, where your arguments are gonna be relying through empirical, means through God, right? You can contrast that with like fideism, which you come to truth through God through means of faith, or to put your complete trust into that with perhaps no evidentiary basis. Presuppositionalism seems to kind of abandon those two, of the evidentialist and the fideism. I can never say it right. In a good way I've heard it is that evidentialism is like idolatric. Is that how you would say it? It's kind of putting you before God. So they reject that type of notion as well as fideism, and instead try to ascertain that the precondition for any fact or the intelligibility of a fact is a quote. It requires the presupposition of usually the Christian God.
Right.
And so that's kind of how I would contrast all those kind of methods. I don't know, what would you add to that, or what would you kind of?
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea that to make sense. How would I say this? Yeah, I was gonna say this.
So it's like, I think me and you both. He goes, check your Facebook messages. My response, I think both of our thoughts were, we have a Facebook.
Yeah, we should make one, but maybe we'll make one this weekend. I'm gonna have a Facebook page yet, but anyway, that threw me off for a second. It's the idea that to be able to decipher reality, we need what is the thing that dumbass Dawkins always says? Darth Dawkins. How do we account?
Yeah. Oh, Cease, you asked me a question.
Yeah.
Are you gonna be rude and filibuster? I'm sorry. No, I'll give you my best Darth impression, right? do you reference a metaphysical primary for the intelligibility of facts in the world?
Right.
In
The
virtue of
intelligibility
not
of
accepting
facts.
my presupposed metaphysical primary, does that necessarily entail the outright denial of all that is ultimate and unchanging? By denying that is all that is ultimate and unchanging, do you realize that you cannot have grounds for the epistemic justification and will ultimately find yourself in a self-refuting position?
Right.
That's the first line. That's actually the first line of the script for our video.
The script that he runs.
Yeah.
But the only thing that in the whole spiel that I remember is this idea of intelligibility of facts, that we somehow need God to be able to make sense of reality in the first place.
Yeah.
That is as stupid of an argument as I've ever heard it.
Yeah. So that's actually a good point you put it, in the sense of like, there's nothing about holding a position like, or let's say you can't account for X in your worldview, right? Like, would you say that not accounting for X in your worldview demonstrates your worldview to be incorrect, or the opposing worldview to be true?
No,
right?
Obviously not.
Yeah. So that, like, even if you could account for X, does it necessarily even mean that you have the actual or right account? Perhaps
No,
not.
and
Newtonian physics can account for certain things, right?
Right.
That's my first example off the top of my head, but so I don't know if that's kind of in line with what you're saying there.
Yeah, no, it is, and I think it's funny that someone like him doesn't realize that we don't need to accept his presuppositions. Like, we can say the same thing about any other system, and we can say that naturalism can account for the intelligibility of facts, and so him denying naturalism, like it's just the same. It's the same thing. It's like I don't even consider it philosophy. I think it's not even sophistry. I think it's just pure delusion that's convinced people who really are not well versed in the field even remotely. And I think because people use that kind of argumentation so arrogantly and playing these word games that will get people who don't really know much philosophy flustered, because it sounds like they're saying something but they're really not. I think it's important for people like us.
The gish gab or whatever, just throw as much shit as you can at somebody and overwhelm them.
I think it's important for people like us to expose that kind of bullshit for what it is. That's what.
So did you want to? Do you want to? I guess we got it. I don't know if I did a good job kind of defining that part. If you wanted to expand upon
I would go farther with that and say that without, it's the idea that for any worldview, you are basing the worldview on axioms that are not self-justifying. I think it's related to that. Would you agree?
Well, yeah. I mean, I take it a step further to say that, essentially that I think the position is you find yourself in like essentially absurdity, right? It's going to be a reductio type of tactic.
Right. And so the accusation that's made towards science, when I say to a theist, well, your methodology can't differentiate between the actual and the imaginary, they'll say things like, yeah, by your standards, by what you've presupposed is the methodology, and it's just in addition to that, the usual go-to will be that belief in God is equatable to belief in an external world. We can under an atheistic or empirical perspective, we can't really account for the external world, and we can't account for the existence of other minds. And it's this way to sort of sneak belief in God as being rational on par with belief in an external world and other minds.
Sure. And so what you would say, kind of an underlying thing they would maybe highlight there would be like, because say I counter with that with, well, no, so I don't necessarily make don't have to presuppose my ontology, right? I'm presented it. I can grant if we go down that route, I can grant what could be potentially otherwise, or the Matrix, or the brain in the vat, or whatever. But there's no presupposition there to that standard, at least, right? Like, it doesn't seem like you have to. It doesn't seem like you have to presuppose anything as opposed to you just use this inductive method, which seems to, like, that's what they're going to kind of attack. At least it seems to be in this way. But then it seems like you're kind of left with the same thing, that you have the same issue with, like, how would you know that if God's nature is X or Y, it doesn't change to Z or A? You know, it seems that you have the same kind of underlying issue that's at least presented in terms of the methodology or whatever that you would be presupposing or whatever.
The problem of induction remains in either worldviews, but
exactly, yeah.
But the issue here is because this is the black and white thinking that is so prevalent on the theistic side, which is, unless you can be certain that reality is a specific kind of way that has a specific ontology. By ontology I mean nature. Well, then we can't know anything, and that is delusional. Like, I don't need to know whether or not the reality we experience is directly experienced. It's the Matrix. We're brain in a vat. It's Descartes' demon creating an illusion. The particular ontology is utterly irrelevant. What we're describing when we're applying philosophy, when we're applying science, when we're applying math, and all these tools that we have, is the appearance of what we think this reality is.
Yeah.
Whether it's a dream or the countless skeptic, arguments you want to come up with, there is something that seems to take place that has a certain kind of structure and pattern that we can point to and understand, and that's enough. That's all we need. And so when the presuppositionalist is attacking science as saying that it's self-dependent on accepting certain things without justification, this is so clearly, it should be so obvious that this is not the case. Like, if I want to see if a pen works, I don't have to presuppose anything. I pick up the pen and I see if the pen works. I'm not presupposing a thing there.
Sure.
Now, when we had a discussion with the people that I won't mention now because they're too scared to come on and talk to us, but you don't know what I'm talking about. They were trying to claim that you're presupposing that the intelligibility of the entire process of us being able to understand that we're picking up a pen and using a pen, and they're confusing logic, like the tool of logic, with general rationality, which can be in part innate, if you want to say that. But that also is not being presupposed. It arises out of being part of the world and experiencing the world. So just because I function a certain way and naturally make sense of the world a certain way, doesn't mean I'm presupposing anything. I'm simply going off of my direct experience.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. I mean, it's not a great example, but it's like that. I mean, do you have to? The argument, at least from the presuppositional side, is like, I would have to presuppose the guy that dropped me off on an island in order to figure out, how to have access to tools to get myself off the island or something, yeah, right? Like that to me always seems I don't know if that's directly analogous, but there's nothing about that you have to presuppose. I mean, you go off of. I mean, the thing I don't like that skips about this for the intelligibility is that, from my perspective, from like just a biological perspective, like, we can account for the reasons of why we can make why I can assign a meaning to something, why I can describe something as a rock, why I can describe something as it is what it is, right? The identity, I can't have this proposition be true or false at the same time, or that it either has to be true or false. These things, it seems it's always a weird thing to me. It's odd, and then I don't want to skip too far ahead but it seems like you have within the presuppositionalist, and I was telling you this, like within that framework, or like down at the bottom where you presuppose this God, you still have all this other metaphysical baggage in there. And when you claim like that, like logic, for example, is the argument at which, you know, really roots this God there, right? It's ultimate, and this is where it's derived from, and it's a lot of people go there with logic. Well, it's weird to me that if we add your metaphysical baggage, right, triune God, omni properties, well, what's at the root of that that's making the ultimate foundation for classical logic, which, by the way, needs its own meta-logical argument to show why we should care. But it seems that it's weird because you add the triune part or the omni part, and now you have something that violates the exact thing at which you think is ultimate, which is identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle. And that those aren't compatible. They're what the laws are stating implicitly, right? Like contained within it, is that you can't be violating these things. Right. But then the thing at which it instantiates it is three things at one time, or has some omni properties that you know are clearly contradictory. That to me is the most absurd part about the foundation. Your epistemic authority starts at which already defeats itself. It already violates itself. It does what it sets out not to do. It does what it sets out to be unchanging or ultimate, and just says, fuck that, does away with it. I'm violating it, sending myself as myself, or whatever, you know. Now, granted, not every presuppositionalist is a Christian. I've seen a Muslim that's a presuppositionalist, but for the sake of the Christian aspect, like, it seems very odd to me that you can sneak that kind of those metaphysics in there, and it just be ultimately self-refuting, ironically.
Right, and yeah, it is self-defeating, and I think, you know, I mean what they're trying to say is that we're presupposing that our senses will work when we trust science or we trust empiricism. But that's again.
Well, what is trust? Well, let me ask. Like, what does that mean when you say that you will trust? Are you saying that I will have Cartesian certainty that this is reliable? Because I never would have ascribed to that. Right. Like that couldn't be. That might not be the case. But the reason why I would argue that I'm not presupposing when I say that, because I feel like the presuppositionalist is going to go, gotcha, right? That's where you're presupposing. The reason why I don't want to say that's the case is that, like, there's nothing about the direct experience, me starting with this axiom of the seeming and moving forward to some inductive process or however you go about it, for me to have to presuppose anything there. It seems to be necessarily derived through, and granted, I'm a, you know, leaning empiricist, right? Like, I lean heavily empiricist, but yeah, it just seems that to me is like, if that's the case, then it seems to me that I don't know. I'll go on a tangent about that, but
well, the other thing I was just gonna follow up by saying that, well, a lot of people on and not just the theistic side, but even some atheists who I've talked to, they don't seem to understand that bringing forth a hypothetical isn't itself an argument. Like, to show that we can't be certain of X as a pure epistemic technicality. Like, yeah, I can't be sure that tomorrow the sun is going to rise the next day.
Yeah.
You know, the problem of induction. I can't be sure that what I'm experiencing isn't a dream. That doesn't make it a reasonable proposition to accept. You need to actually provide an argument as to why those notions can explain reality better than belief in an external world and belief in other minds. Yeah. So the fact that we can't be sure that those things are real 100% doesn't put that belief on par with belief in God or belief in the Matrix or belief that we're brains in a vat. And it's, I think, an error, and I think intellectually dishonest, to try to pretend like, unless you have certainty, that all these ideas are on par with each other. Because no, they're not.
Yeah.
And I want to read, if it's all right with you.
Sure.
I want to read a quote references the cogito. The cogito is René Descartes, the French philosopher, was famous for his meditations, in which he said, his famous line is, "I think, therefore I am." And it's supposed to be sort of the foundation of knowledge. Like if we doubt everything, we doubt the existence of the external world, other minds, our senses, everything you can think of, is there anything that is left that we can't doubt? And Descartes finds himself with the recognition that the only thing that you can doubt is your own existence. That is self-evident. And people like myself have, of course, Descartes was dualist, I'm not, but people like myself have tried to use the cogito as a foundation, as a starting point for knowledge. And I've been attacked by people trying to claim that to even be able to use the cogito, I had to presuppose language in the first place. It's always this accusation of there is some presupposition that we're all starting from, so there's really not much difference between us and the theist. And I want to read this quote that's I know it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just have immediate objections when I hear that right away, but I'm trying to keep my mouth shut.
And I want to, so there is this philosopher who wrote this paper in 1962, whose name is Draco Hintika, who tries to show why this approach to the cogito is mistaken. And this is the quote. Well, this is a description about the paper.
Sure.
It says, in an influential 1962 paper, Hintika argues that the cogito should be understood non-inferentially, as a performative utterance. On this analysis, I exist doesn't follow logically from I think, nor does Descartes suppose otherwise. Rather, the transition from I think to I exist is non-logical. Indeed, the statement that I do not exist is not logically incoherent. The key point, according to Hintika, that the very act of thinking that statement, the cognitive performance, is existentially incoherent. I cannot both think the statement that I exist and not believe it to be true. Hintika takes the emphasis on cogito as intended to express the performatory character of Descartes' insight. It refers to the performance, to the act of thinking. Through the sentence, I exist, may be said to verify itself. In other words, it may be true that to say, I think, therefore I am, is I need language to express the notion, right? Like I have to presuppose language in a certain sense. I don't think I'm presupposing it. I'm using it as a tool. But it would be true.
Presuppose language, but anyway.
Right. I think it's nonsense. And our scripts, our episode that will be coming out with the narration video will go more in depth about why that view of language is incorrect. But the point I'm making is that it's not like a baby ceases to exist because it can't express its own existence, right? Like there is an existential reality to that, to the act of existence, and the thinking about that existence that is true independent of the language that we're using as a tool to describe it. So again, it's the phenomena coming before the description. The critics of the cogito that try to claim that I'm still presupposing something when I say I think, therefore I am, as a foundation, are just misunderstanding what the cogito was intended as, which is something that's pretty common sense. Like I can't think and not exist. If I'm thinking, I exist in some form.
Yeah, and I've actually had this argument with somebody on Discord recently, and they were kind of like, they were sick of me kind of talking. They go, well, give me a syllogism. They're like, I'm done. Give me a syllogism. I was like, all right, I'll modus ponens you. And I just thought at the top of my head, I was like, If I'm giving you a syllogism, then I exist. I'm writing a syllogism, therefore I exist. And I was like, now you try to give me a syllogism for like doubting existence. And I was like, well, when you do so, you're ultimately going to rely on the fact that you exist in order to prop up any syllogism that you have to argue for against the notion. So the second you put pen to paper, you've proven your interlocutor's point. Even before that, but hopefully you recognize it by the time you sit down to go, to try to doubt that aspect. It just seems absurd.
I mean, yeah, I've actually talked to people that have said, well, how can you know that you can't think and not exist? Like at that point, I end the conversation, because if you can't see how incoherent that is, then you just are delusional. I mean, I don't know how to respond to that. Like, it's on you to show me how you can think without existing. Like, it's just so dumb. It should be self-evident that you can't have one without the other. One leads into the other in that way. And so, when I guess do you want to add anything, or?
Well, no. I mean, I was gonna relate that more, or at least to the logic side of things, since that's usually where they go. But no. Continue. I'll add.
Okay.
After.
Sure. So, what I was gonna say was, what am I presupposing when I drop a ball and I measure how fast it's falling? Like, I would be presupposing something if I was making a claim about ontology, about what my reality is. But I'm just observing.
On that note, I actually wanted to bring this up because I was going to type a response, but it's just easier to say. I think 4am is not a solution to solipsism. I don't think that we would disagree to say that that clearly you could still be a brain in a vat, right? You could still, that could still be the case. The issue where, I guess there's two issues. One, the seeming or the existence still exists in all cases. Like, you don't get rid of whatever the root of the existence is. Like, if we are just the extension of Descartes' demon, then that's what's doing the thinking. Or if we're a brain in a vat, that's what's doing the thinking. There's still the thinking. Which is what the axiom's on. Now, the second problem or thing that someone could come at, the presuppositionalist, which I touched on subtly at the beginning, is that right there, that's kind of what you're presupposing. You're presupposing your ontology or things like that. That's where I disagree. I mean, if you could show me that, that'd be great. But it seems very obvious to me that this is secondary to the phenomena of you exist, and then you have to, ultimately, at least from my perspective, is that I'm not going to make the claim towards this is the case, but I can use inductive evidence the same way that I say, pretty sure a mailbox is going to be corresponding to that house when I drive by it. But like, if it doesn't happen in that sense, like, I'm not committed to this Cartesian claim that this is the case. I'm just stating that inductively I'm justified from my perspective. Maybe that gets more into like an internalist perspective of justification or
sure
like that. But
which we'll definitely have a show just on justification.
And that's kind of what I'm navigating myself, right? But let me add something to that. So if I make the statement, and that's something that I'm also navigating for. It seems like you can't have those types of conversations with a presup, right? Because it's almost like, oh, your whole worldview collapsed. Well, no, just because you claim to have an epistemic authority presupposed where you think all the things kind of fall out of the picture, that's just disingenuous, because clearly you do the exact work you do in terms of maybe looking up Van Til's perspectives or Bonson's. Like, you still apply the same research. Like, I hate the argument because I've talked to so many people in a Van Til camp as opposed to like a Bonson camp. And by the way, what I mean by that is Van Til was a Dutch, I think it's a Dutch American philosopher. He kind of known as forming the roots of presuppositional apologetics. And then you also have Greg Bonson. And so some people are divided into these camps of presuppositionalists. And so it's like, even in that case, it's like, I feel like you can't have the conversation with the presuppositionalist even if you admit, this is a subtle point, but even if you admit yeah, I'm navigating moral realism or whatever, it's like your whole world, you have no intelligibility. And I've had that before. And I always feel like that's just such a dishonest way of going about philosophy. I don't know a philosopher that would just say, oh, I started with all these positions and now I'm just defending them and making derivations to my arguments all the time, right? Like that seems a little weird.
But it's just delusional because
a lot in the stream.
They haven't justified their approach for intelligibility. They're just stating that they have it without actually showing that that's the case. And to the comment that Zachariah made, I agree with you. I'm not suggesting that the cogito is a solution to solipsism. It also depends on what it is you mean by a solution. Like, I'm not talking. The only thing I'm certain of is that I exist. Now, what I exist as, or the ontology of my reality, remains an open question. The issue here is a solipsist perspective as reasonable and justified to believe as other perspectives. Like when I experience reality, and within that experience, things like the laws of logic emerge, like as descriptors of that experience, that I can't make sense out of something being and not being at the same time, or that I patterns seem to emerge, and that yes, my senses may fail at times, but how do I become aware of that? Still by using my senses. And so, yes, my understanding of reality may be, or what that reality is may be ambiguous, and I may lack certainty, but there seems to be the point of the scientific method is to try to get as close as to the way things seem to be as we can possibly get. And while remaining humble about the awareness that we can never be certain. That's why nobody in science says that science produces truth with an absolute capital T. So these are the best working models that we have.
Yeah.
We're using the tools that we have to the best of our ability, and we're as close as we can get to certainty, but there's still a gap there. That doesn't mean that now all other views are equal. For someone for a solipsist, they have to show why reality can be better explained by doubting other minds, and better explained by doubting the tools that we all use inherently.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry to cut you off, but look at I don't know if this fits, but like a dog, right? I think a dog would apply some inductive assessment without really, that's the phenomena, right, that you would be describing after the fact that we can. But it seems the fact that they can salivate at the sound of a certain thing. I mean, maybe that might not be the best example, but there's certain, whether it be a kid or something, there's certain things that you kind of you through experience is what is giving you the insight that the next time when you hear this, that might happen, right? Or a bell or whatever it might, I don't know, whatever it would be. You see your mom, maybe you're going to be nurtured or whatever it might be, right? It seems like the fact that you could go after it and go, okay, I describe that as an inductive process. It seems to, right? Like, is that kind of where you're?
Yeah, pretty much. And this idea, kind of going off of the last comment I saw, that we have to presuppose nature having a uniformity. No, we're not doing that. Science isn't doing that either, by the way. If there was no uniformity to nature, then we would see that there was no experiment. Like, yeah, it may be true that we couldn't do science, but long term. But we're not presupposing that it has to be ontologically the case that nature will always remain uniform. That's just, nobody's saying that. What we're doing is, you have to show why solipsism can explain things easier and better than other perspectives. Mm-hmm. And to just use an epistemic technicality, like it could be the case It's like, well, anything could be the case. Now you have to actually do more than that. You have to show an argument as to why I should accept one perspective as to be more likely to be the case than another. We don't need to presuppose God to have intelligibility of anything. All we need is the experience, and we can build off of that experience certain patterns, and that's what we do when we apply science. Again, the example I gave earlier, what am I presupposing if I want to use a pen to see if it works and I use the pen to see if it works? I'm not presupposing anything. I'm noticing that when I use a tool, it works out. Like, same thing with language. Like, if I say to you, let's meet at Starbucks at 3. And okay, I may not be certain that the concepts of Starbucks, the concept of 3 o'clockness, the concept of meet is going to be exactly the same in your mind than it is in mine, because we're different people. I can't even be sure that you exist, right?
Mm.
But guess what happens? We both show up at Starbucks at 3. Like, it works. And for anybody doubting that, it would be a huge fucking coincidence that language works, seems to capture something, and by virtue of the fact that
just multiple, wouldn't the fact that we have how many ever languages to describe the experiential state after the fact in just so many different ways just be an amalgamation of evidence towards what we're saying in this, right? Like, and I sometimes I struggle to follow when you presuppose the language or presuppose the thing. It's like to put that in there seems to be entirely counterintuitive to how we understand language in the first place. Like, it seems to just flip the script on what we already is kind of implicit within it, right? It is to describe, right? There's something about the tree, that I use the word that's intrinsically part of it, or something like that. It's like the logic aspect of it was always strange to me, because like something is what it is. There'd be no human. The rock or the planet or whatever it is that we use still is what it is. Like, right. So it's still the fact of that identity remains, because it's just modeling reality. You have to have the mind in order to come up with that after the fact, not a mind that predates it in order for it to work. That always seems like a backwards response.
Yeah, it just never made sense to me. Okay, the people who think that you need God for logic to work or to make sense of things just don't understand the relationship between the tools we use in our reality.
Sure.
You have to show why it's the case, as opposed to rationality just being an emergent feature of consciousness and also making sense of reality as being part of it.
Yeah.
As just being a process that naturally takes place. You have to show why the alternative is more reasonable.
Yeah, and the worst part is, like, I can show you intermediate species, right, of or just stages, intermediate stages of evolution through species, right, where consciousness level or ability to reason is like gradient. Like, you could literally look at it at gradient towards pretty much us at the top, to have the ability to have like second order desires and these types of things. To me, like, the evidence is so overwhelming to state that, especially in my worldview as a naturalist and someone that believes in evolution. And if you're a presuppositionalist to believe in evolution, I feel like this is harder for you. It's like the irreducible complexity argument about the eye or something like that. It's like, well, you can look at these intermediate stages, and you can do this with consciousness or even the ability to reflect back. And so, like, that's what was always weird to me, is that the intelligibility of that is stemmed through a process. It's not stemmed through a singular point of an authority or an epistemic authority that just like gives light to the knowledge. This is how the development processes its environment and deals with its environment. And that's why even running away from something that isn't technically intelligible, to say like the bear that's not actually in the bush, and why that passes off as a beneficial thing in the first place. Like, we have examples of these things where or actually having the intelligibility of the wrong thing is beneficial to the development. But
I want to address something real quick because I think it's important. Intelligibility of reality presupposes laws of logic and relative uniformity of nature. Here's why I don't agree with that. Because I've had dreams where really, any kind of coherency that we're used to starts to fall apart. Like environments will change off the drop of a hat. People will become different people. And you won't even think twice about it while you're experiencing the dream. And yet some kind of intelligibility of what's going on remains, right? Like it just seems to be the way in which we make sense of what we're experiencing, even when things on the surface seem to change. I've had dreams where, I look like myself, and then the next moment, I somehow look like someone else, and yet some sense of identity remains in that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not convinced that I'm presupposing anything when I'm making sense of the reality that I'm experiencing. Now, of course, the less uniform nature is, the less patterns emerge, the less likely and the harder it becomes to make sense of the reality we're experiencing, because we start to lose the grounds that we have to make predictions. So
give me one second. Keep going. I gotta let my cat in before she scratches my door up.
So no. So you say that I assume my nature is relatively uniform. Something and something else is the differentiation in my dream. I'm not sure that I'm assuming uniformity. I think I'm experiencing something that remains the same even among a chaotic environment. Now, I agree with you that for us to move forward and do and do science. Wait, hold on. The comment that you have up on the screen directly violates the progress we are making on the most difficult aspects of physics. Begin to know. Would you mind elaborating on that in the comments, and I'll put it up. I'm curious to see why it is that you feel that way. But yeah, I'm not making a claim to certainty that reality has to be uniform. Like that's why I'm saying that I actually make no claims about ontology. It could be the case that tomorrow we'll wake up and everything we've accepted to see.
His wording switch, though, he went from presupposition to assume. Nobody's going to argue like assumptions and things like that is a crux of discovery and novel predictions. So I'm curious on the change to intelligibility presupposes to you assume your nature is relatively uniform. I mean, would you find a difference in that? I see it. To me, that's a distinct difference between a presupposition and an assumption. But
yeah.
Also, but I mean, that might just be pedantic.
Begin to know says fundamental physics may be violating both logic and apparent uniformity of nature, yet we are making progress. Yeah, I have trouble understanding, what you mean
under your baseline presupposition.
Because what is? I think we've talked about it before. Like when we're violating, if you want to say that we're violating logic, then I'm not sure what it is we're saying at that point, and what we mean by progress. As far as this comment, as I dream, my experience is mapped onto the baseline presupposition of the relative uniformity of nature. I don't think that's the case, because what I'm experiencing is actually quite the opposite. I'm not experiencing this uniformity that I'm used to, of people remaining the same or environments remaining the same. I'm observing all of that changing, and yet me retaining some ability to still differentiate between subject and object in some form, even if granted in a universe where things are always in flux, that becomes harder to do. But I'm not sure that it falls apart to the degree where now we have to make presuppositions. The experience is the experience, right?
It's so weird to me because I don't see a situation where I always go back to logic, but it's just a good example where these things aren't derived after the fact instead of as opposed to the presupposition. I don't have to like presuppose the map of Hawaii in order to like make sense. Like the land exists, and then I can derive a map or a model based off of the experience of navigating through the land.
Right. I'm not presupposing patterns.
Presuppose the map or something in order for me to have the intelligibility.
So I'm not presupposing the land. I'm not presupposing the patterns that I see emerge. I'm observing the patterns and then making sort of building a justified system of belief based on those observations. Now, you could be right in saying that, from that experience, I can't make the claim to certainty that then the next state of patterns will remain forever and ever. No one's saying that. So again, I'm not presupposing that the patterns therefore are going to remain there forever.
Sure, and I'd like to. I'd be very pedantic about it, but I want to know his like definition of uniformity as well as begin to gnosis, because like he could have a perspective of like a concrete one or versus a concrete many, like a set of kind of items that unify. So yeah, there's a lot of terms you'd have to define. I feel like it was a good point to make there, but yeah, I always go with the map thing. It's like I always go back to the fact that it's like to say logic or whatever it might be determines these. We'll go with logic again. Determines relational behaviors as opposed to the opposite, where relational behaviors are informed through logic, right after the fact. Like we come up with a system. I mean, if that wasn't the case, like the thing is like I'm not so. Like you could have anyone that could go with some paraconsistent logic, right? Like you could someone that deals with contradictions. This goes back to the argument that I don't like how the precepts do this whole thing, is that there's no precept because I'm willing to accept some form of logic if shown right. But the thing is that with yours is that you don't have a metalogical argument for why I should care, why the classical logic should be presupposed in there or packaged in there. Because what if it works out in a kind of similar sense with classical mechanics and quantum mechanics, where logic, how we know it, identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle, applies to all all larger objects, right? Same way that you don't get like a superposition with a tennis ball or something, right? It doesn't affect these kind of macro objects, so to speak. And so I could still have a methodological utilization, but at no point do I need to presuppose or assume that is the fact. I can have methodological utility off of it without knowing if it's actually, fully the thing. And I would be inclined to say I'm pretty confident that they accurately describe the world, but so I'm also not the one making the claim, a metaphysical claim that it necessarily is, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
I want to respond to a few comments here. The interpretation of experience is where your presuppositions are used. I'm not sure what you mean. Like, what is the interpretation of the experience? Like, if I drop a ball and the ball hits the ground, what is the interpretation, or what could be the different interpretations? And what are the presuppositions that are being derived from observing that event? And then begin to post. As an example, we can mathematically derive the common sense relation between force and acceleration from a world where things live in many different places at the same time. In other words, the world where logic may fall apart is so related in a rigorous way to the world where logic clearly applies. Yeah, I think we've talked about this before, and I struggle making sense of that.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah,
I
that's not
don't.
I would agree. It's
You know,
something to ponder.
I don't know that you know we can. You know, on one hand, it's like, well, why should we assume that our intuitions can be carried out indefinitely? And on the other, it's like, I don't. If we abandon logic in that sense, then I'm not convinced that we're ultimately actually saying anything. So
Yeah.
I don't know that makes sense to me. And as far as this comment, you presuppose that your senses are consistent. No, I don't think that's true either, because I can recognize that my senses can be faulty, and in fact do and will fail. It's just that I observe those failures through the same senses, um, and I don't think that is a defeater for empiricism, and I don't think that that is showing any presuppositions. And I think these are observations that come after the fact. I'm not presupposing the language will work. I'm observing the fact that when I tell Mike to meet me at Starbucks at 3 o'clock, that he shows up at what I think Starbucks and 3 o'clock are. And the presuppositionalists want to say that when in that process we're presupposing certain things, and I think that we're not. We're simply observing the fact that it works, and that there is a reason why it works, which is we are actually grasping um, something real there. Like we're coming into contact with reality in a real sense. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
it seems like you could just make this argument now with anything, like, right? Like you for anything you would do, you have this assertion of you had to presuppose to do that, and that's literally what I was going to say. From what you said about interpretation, it's like you could do that, but all those seem to me to be like interpretations or utilizing kind of the experience and deriving after the fact. I don't mean to sound, I don't want to sound mean, but I really struggle with how the precept thinks this is a good argument. Like, it's almost embarrassing to me. Nothing to you, Zach, but like, or if anyone holds, like, it's just it's nothing personal, but it's the argument itself doesn't seem thought out. It sounds like they're like, you're not getting to that spot. It's like, no, it just doesn't make any sense to have to presuppose that in any way. Like, I don't even know how that's possible to do.
I would want to know. I would want to know how it is possible to have different interpretations of the observation of a ball falling on the ground. Like what? You know, I mean, yes, we can come up with different models as to what actually is going on there. Like, is it gravity? Is it, you know, God magically pulling the ball
Maybe when
down?
we drop the ball, the world comes to it. You know, I don't know.
So I mean, that's a different thing. But I'm just talking about the just phenomenological experience of seeing that action. I don't think that I'm necessarily interpreting anything there. Maybe I'm wrong, but um, uh, yeah, I don't know. It's just something that I have trouble understanding what is meant by interpretations and presuppositions in the context of
Well, because it seems to be this
experiences that
thing
are
that's like
direct.
it has to be like prescriptive or like in some way where it's like comes before, you know, the horse comes before the carriage or something. That's kind of the argument or something. I don't know. Sorry
So
to cut you
okay,
off.
no. So because Ada wrote, I think maybe I'm struggling to make sense of what I'm trying to say. I'll try to express it this way. From my perspective, when I experience reality, I'm not presupposing anything before the fact. It's not that I presuppose certain things and then fit reality into that standard. That's something that a lot of theists accuse scientists of doing.
Yeah.
That's not how that works. We don't change reality to fit our models.
Yeah.
Our models fail. Our expectations sometimes fail, because we think we're going to see a certain thing, and then reality shows us otherwise. So the presuppositionalist wants to say that for us to engage with the world, we can only do so by presupposing language, by presupposing logic, by presupposing tools that they want to say are not self-justified. And I want to say that that's not true, and that is clearly not true. And that's why I used the example earlier about Starbucks. If I tell Mike to meet me there, and he shows up at the time that I said to show up, I'm observing the fact that the tools that I've applied work. I'm not presupposing them. I'm observing that they work. The same way that if I want to see if a pen works, I pick up the pen and I write with it. And I see that it works. The same thing with language. I tell Mike, meet me at Starbucks at 3. I go to Starbucks at 3. He shows up at Starbucks at 3. I see that we have the same kind of ideas in mind. And the presuppositionalist is going to have a hard time showing why we should think that my ideas of Starbucks and 3 o'clockness should be vastly different than Mike's ideas of those things, and yet we both show up at the same place, and it seems to work out that way. That's how I would put that.
Yeah, I mean, and the response I think to that is always going to be akin to some well, you have the ability to use it. That stems from the epistemic authority, right? You don't know that, but or you would say that I guess depending on who you're talking to, like Psi 10 would say that you do know it somehow, even though you don't.
Know what exactly?
The presupposition of God.
Yeah, I mean,
he would go as far as to make that claim, I believe. But I think others, might go a route where at least the fact that we both can have that, right, is that's why we can, is because of this presupposition of God, makes that intelligible for that to work for us. So it's not that you can't utilize the tools or something like that. That seems to at least be the kind of the things, that's why you can use them, but you're presupposing X instead of Y, which God would be Y. The problem is there's no justification from my perspective to say one presupposition. What stops me from saying, okay, hey, I am presupposing. I'm presupposing naturalism, and in fact, you have to presuppose naturalism in order to have the intelligibility for contingent natural facts, or whatever you want to say, for the intelligibility of facts. It's like the faith thing. It's how are we going to solve the fundamental difference if I do adopt the presupposition, right? Let's just grant it. I adopt your presupposition, or I adopt presuppositions. I presuppose naturalism. You can't have the intelligibility of facts without it. I see nothing that's not on par with the argument from the presuppositionalist argument. It's just an assertion of epistemic authority. It's no actual demonstration of why I should actually accept that as the epistemic authority, or that if there is one in that sense, as opposed to just, in my opinion, my real opinion, that you derive everything after the state of the experience,
right?
Which would be your axiom, and then your initial axiom, and anyone wants to try to argue against that axiom, I implore.
It just seems like an endless.
I would love you to, because the second you put your pen to the paper to try to do that, you have to rely on exactly what I'm arguing for in order for you to try to argue against it.
Right, just like a cycle, it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. I'll show you. How are you going to show me? Oh, by existing and doing this. It's you just proved my point. Don't even waste your time with a syllogism.
And
if I write a syllogism, then I exist. P implies Q. I'm writing a syllogism. I fucking exist. Tell me where that's not sound, right? Because it's modus ponens. It's clearly valid. So tell me where it's not sound.
Even if science was mainstream presuppositions, science has a methodology that can test whether or not those presuppositions hold true or eventually defeated in a way that theism doesn't, unless they want to say that.
Again, there's no self-correcting method, even if we grant the presupposition to say, it just proves itself, right?
Right. Of course, they would go deeper than that. They would say, well, you're presupposing logic to do science in the first place and all of that. But as we already acknowledged before, I think that is a mistake in how these tools are being understood and how these languages are being understood. It's just.
Yeah, and there's something I would have to think more on, and I'd be interested, like, it's because this kind of came into my head now, but I like the idea of thinking of it, from a quantum perspective to a classical perspective, of that we might have great utility out of like classical logic on that classic, the larger macro scale, as opposed to some quantum. And I'm not going to argue that quantum physics like necessarily violates identity or something, but if it is the case that the further we go in, we see that it doesn't behave in those ways. Well, I think that still has a utility in the world the same way, Newtonian physics has utility. I mean, I know people's jobs that depend on specifically just using like Newtonian physics for whatever they're doing, and there's clearly intelligibility there to use an incorrect model or assessment. I mean, look at all of our mathematics in that sense. I mean, I'm not presupposing any uniformity there, because I'm kind of under the basis that, we have applicability, would say, with mathematics, but all the models could be wrong by the time we get to a certain point, Planck time or something. You know what I mean? So it's like, I don't know if that if that kind of makes sense to anybody, but that's kind of how I think about it. And Mark says you're looking cute today.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. I saw that made me laugh. So this comment I'm a little confused about. Here's a presupposition that is essential to all methods of inquiry. Truth satisfies the intellect. To deny
presupposition is essential to all methods of inquiry.
To deny this is to presuppose the truth of the very proposition being denied. I'm not sure that I'm
yeah, I'm gonna have to think about it, because it's a tongue twister. Truth satisfies the intellect. To deny it, this is to. I think to deny this is to presuppose the truth of the very proposition being denied. I have to write that out. To deny this is to presuppose the truth. The truth is in there. No, it's only in there too many times. I'm like, why am I getting confused by this? Yeah, I'd have to think about that. That's something I'd have to look at. That's definitely an interesting thought. What's your kind of immediate thoughts on it, or if you have any?
I'm gonna take a screenshot of that, because I'm not sure that I understand. Hold on a second.
Yeah, it's like when you I remember the first time I picked but I don't know if I mentioned this on the air, but the first time I picked up Hume, I remember reading like one sentence and being like, "What the fuck drugs this guy take? Like, why does he need 8 commas?" And it was hard for me to understand. But that's really unrelated. I just wanted to point that out. That I don't think Hume's like, I like Hume, but I don't think I think he's a dog shit writer.
Yeah, I don't think it's.
I think the amount of commas and semicolons is like the most unfucking necessary thing I've ever seen. Please send it to me. I'd love that.
Sartre. Sartre is an awful writer.
I'm trying to think if I grant that, right, truth satisfies the intellect, and then to deny this is to presuppose the truth of the very proposition. Look, I get what's being said. I guess I kind of have to. I want to look at that through each route and kind of take it to its extreme. But yeah, thanks for putting that out there, because I'm someone that's gonna go. I don't care if someone I've stated I don't feel like I have presuppositions. I've stated that. I've also stated that I don't care if someone shows me I do. Like, that doesn't change anything. It would be beneficial to know that. But I don't think that would hinder any progress in the fact that I feel like you would be able to test certain things, right? Or kind of akin to what you said about evaluating certain methods and things like that. I see a major difference if I had said I presuppose like naturalism, or I presuppose some specific metaphysical kind of thing, like the Christian God, which is triune and has all this other metaphysical baggage, which, like I said at the beginning of the show, violates the thing it's instantiating, which is classical logic, makes no fucking sense at all. That route is like principle of parsimony. Even if I just presuppose naturalism, like I win. You presuppose this extra thing with all this extra metaphysical baggage that contradicts the ultimate aspect of logic, being identity and non-contradiction, and your thing's seemingly sending itself as itself to die upon a cross and then be king of everybody.
So I want to read you.
Seems weird to have those packaged together, but
Pessimistic Idealism just sent me something on Discord.
Yeah, he sent the the thingy bobber.
Do you want to go over, or do you want to talk about?
Oh, is it? I thought he just sent the same thing. I don't have my Discord open. If you have it,
no, I can read it to you if you'd like.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
He says that in his book, Appearance and Reality, Bradley tells us that the actual starting point and basis of this work is an assumption about truth and reality. I have assumed that the object of metaphysics is to find a general view which will satisfy the intellect. And I have assumed that whatever succeeds in doing this is real and true, and that whatever fails is neither. This is a doctrine which, so far as I can see, can neither be proved nor questioned. The natural way of interpreting this passage, if it is taken by itself, seems to be this. The scientist assumes that there are uniformities to be discovered within his field of investigation. Otherwise, he would never look for them. And he has to assume that the generalizations which satisfy his intellect are true. Further investigations may lead to modify or change his conclusions, but he cannot proceed at all without making some presupposition. Similarly, we are free to pursue metaphysics or to leave it alone, but if we pursue it at all, we inevitably assume that a general view of reality is possible, and therefore that reality as a whole is intelligible in principle.
I have an equivocation issue there, and maybe I heard that wrong, but from assume to presupp is not. I mean, that's a bait and switch from my perspective.
Well, I mean, the first thing that I noticed from that is that I don't know of any scientists, at least ones that are not completely dogmatic, who talk about science and what they're doing as producing certainty or absolute truth in that sense of the word.
C's is reading. Yeah, we were reading the thing someone sent us. Welcome to the show. I don't know if that's what you meant by that, but welcome. That was a really weird way to come in. I don't know if that was like towards you in some way, but welcome to catching up to what everybody already knows.
No, I don't know what's happening there, but
like I'll send you something about it. Hey, he's reading something. Yeah.
But I don't think he meant it in a better way.
Okay, I hope not, because that would have been really embarrassing. Maybe I'm embarrassing myself.
It's possible. we've all done it.
Yeah.
But no, I'm not sure why this idea that we're presupposing uniformity. Because I don't think that we're observing uniformity in certain places where it exists, and then we're noticing in other places it doesn't exist, and we can't make heads or tails about it. We're simply observing what seems to take place in front of us. I'm not sure what presupposition there is being made. I just don't see that. I don't think the scientist goes into doing science with the certainty that they're going to see uniformity. They simply observe it where it can be observed, and where it can't, like in all places in quantum mechanics, there's a lot of
and I mean I would argue too, like this ignores the embodiment of like philosophical discourse, metaphysical claims, and all these other things that might not presuppose some uniformity, and looking at those or presupposing them and looking at those. It doesn't start from there. It's literally has come out of philosophy. It's come out of it's built upon something. It doesn't just start with this. It's built upon each experiential state, right? You don't. I think this is what's getting lost. I think it's starting to make sense to me. It's what's getting lost, especially in that passage to me. And maybe I'm hearing this wrong, but when you go into the science has to assume uniformity. It doesn't just start that. I don't think it just starts that way. And that's the progress we've led ourselves to going from each event, each minor increment that we've tried to gain some insight. We've started to realize that this assumption could be the case. And in fact, when we apply the assumption of, say, like uniformity of physics or something like that, like the Big Bang or something, well, yeah, that's like, just go look at, really, you can go look at a Wikipedia page. It'll say, some major assumptions within this. That's not a problem, but those are built upon the groundwork already. There's no, I fail to see the presupposition there. You're not starting from ground zero and doing that.
Yeah,
but I'm not sure that it's not that I say I'm with what he's saying. I'm not sure that I don't know if how he's laying that out is something I would agree with. When you say truth satisfies intellect, like that, to me, I'm going to have to even know exactly what you mean. Truth satisfies intellect seems that you're setting up something in a way that I don't know if is accurately representing the actual scenario. But
so I mean, okay, so
but I mean, I could be wrong. That's just
what you said. Uniformity of nature is probably meant to say the reliability of induction. I mean, it's one thing if you want to say that we can't be certain, that we can't justify induction with any kind of certainty. Of course we can't. But I don't think any scientist would say that we could. Like, yeah, it could be the case that tomorrow we'll wake up and all the laws, or what we think are the laws of nature that we've observed up until this point, could have been flipped upside down. But again, this goes back to what I said in the beginning of the show, which is, we need more than an epistemic technicality to trust a sentence. Like, we need an argument that's. I don't think you could justify it without being certain either. What would a universe look like where, in a condition where we don't have access to the future? Like, this is why I don't think that all the criticism of induction make a lot of sense to me once you move away from certainty. Without certainty, I don't think there's any problem with induction. Like, everything about our experience, which is, yes, a limited but a tool nonetheless that we have, gives us and brings us the expectation that, for example, we'll see the sun rise tomorrow. I guess it becomes, the question becomes, well, what do you mean by justification, and what is your standard of justification, and how high or how low is a standard? Mm-hmm. And maybe that's an issue. I'm not sure how to approach that. I just never bought the idea that induction was such an issue.
Sure. And so to back this up to the presuppositionalist thing, it's like, even if we just go along the route, I find the same, kind of like we said, I find the same issues. There's nothing about like presupposing that epistemic authority that gives you any insight to its intent, its will, or that the Bible is somehow even related to that in any way. Like, nothing gets you there. You can't. I mean, you can't even get there. But even then, nothing about the presupposition confirms that the nature, of that, God is going to just remain the same, or that it wouldn't change, or that it wouldn't just, hey, today we're doing paraconsistent logic or dialetheistic or whatever the fuck, I have said that dialetheistic. I don't know if I say that right, but anyway, yeah, it seems it's really strange to me that the problem, at least of which is invoked there, seems to presuppose the presupposition they hold, right? Of that you presuppose that the God, your presupposition has a presupposition that the initial item for you, that God is going to remain the same throughout throughout the time. And that to me is like, you're killing, even if the argument applied, it seems to backfire on yourself. It seems to apply a reductio to itself.
I just want to address this real quick. It says, do you have any reason to suppose the inductive principle is true about the world? It doesn't beg the question. I'm wondering what you feel it is I'm saying that is begging the question. I tentatively approach reality with the expectation that, the laws that I seem to be aware of currently are not going to be vastly different tomorrow. I'm not sure that I would go as far as saying that I hold the inductive principle to be true. It's simply an expectation that I have through my experience that it's likely to be the case. But I'm not sure what you mean by that. Like, again, think about the hypothetical that I used. In a context in which we can't have certainty, in a context in which we don't have access to the future, how do we ever know, how would I say this? It just seems like we're always going to have that epistemic sort of roadblock there, where we can only really tentatively approach our reality and talk about that reality in a more nuanced and ambiguous way, where like, okay, this is the way things appear to be. These are the patterns that seem to emerge. These are the tools that we're using, however flawed, and this is the best that we can do. I'm not sure that any of those things are based on presuppositions. I think, if anything, science seems to be doing away with a lot of our intuitions, common sense and otherwise, about how the world seems to be. And even where I think there are presuppositions, science has a methodology to kind of check those in a way that other methodologies don't. I don't know. Would you?
No, I like that, because for me, like that's what it kind of, for me, it goes back to, it's like, even if I grant that's the case, or you have some, which I don't, it's not it's definitely a setback in some sense, where you got to go back and analyze it and go, okay, well, I mean, how valuable is the presupposition in that sense? Yeah, but I would kind of agree with you on that, right? That you could actually, with the methodology, which someone would say you presuppose, you have an ability to actually analyze those in some way. And the only argument that's left for them is to say, well, you just presuppose that whole thing. I mean, invoking that problem to me sets yourself back in your own thing of that epistemic authority, because it just seems like you can't actually make ground in any way other than just to stop at where you started, kind of. I don't know if that makes any sense, but.
Let me address this comment, because I think you came in a little bit late, so I'll try to explain this way. I don't make any claims about ontology, about what the nature actually is. What I'm doing is I'm assuming an ontology based on a limited epistemology. So, it could be the case that I'm a brain in a vat. It could be the case I'm in the matrix. It could be the case that it's all a dream. I would need actual arguments as to why I should take any of those options as more credible than the external world and other minds. Just a pure technicality of it could be the case isn't enough for me to accept it as a credible alternative.
Yeah.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that I'm trying to think of. You said something there that I was going to go off of, and then I forgot. I guess what I'm saying is, even if you want to say that the scientific perspective is limited, like we can apply science, but ultimately never get underneath what our reality is, and so it could all be the appearance of something that's an illusion. Like you could come up with, the skeptic can come up with a million arguments like that, or scenarios like that. Okay, that's fair enough. Like I said, I agree with that. We can't get behind that ontology. But even in that context, where maybe the chair that I'm touching right now could be created by a demon, that is still less removed than the theistic belief in a God that I don't even have that level of access to. So it's like almost like a dream within a dream type of scenario I'm trying to describe here. I don't. So he writes, I don't make claims about ontology. Is that a claim about some agent doing some activity? The only thing that I can claim certainty about is that I exist. Not that I know what I exist as, like what the nature of that is, what the nature of my reality is. If there's a reality outside of myself, I can't be sure of other minds. Like all those things are, I can apply tools that I think create a path that is justified in believing, but I can't make claims of certainty about those things. I can only, and I will go back to the beginning of the episode to see why it is that I use the cogito as a foundation for at least one certainty, which is my existence.
Yeah,
I don't want to repeat that because
it would be worth it because there's a lot of assumptions like he could make, right? Like, I mean, you went off of a direct distinction between inferential and non-inferential, which I assume would be a rebuttal to him, right? He might just come out with some way that you define the self, or maybe present. I think Bertrand Russell, right, has a kind of an argument for that. I'm reading in I have the book next to me, Problems of Philosophy. But yeah, I agree with the non-inferential aspect, and that would probably answer some questions that he would not answer questions, but he probably have some objections where you would be doing the same thing. Or if you go back and look, you'll see I've addressed that in some sense.
Yeah, I read a quote by somebody addressing that interpretation of the cogito, and maybe go back, and that might help.
Yeah, we just hit about the hour and 30. We still got a few. I mean, we're not really pressed. I'm checking my battery. I got 17%, so that's pretty good. So yeah, I would say, is there anything you want to kind of wrap it up on, or if anybody in the comments has a question or anything like that? Someone said, did you bring something for show and tell? I did. Try to. She's sleeping now.
Oh,
so
that's so adorable.
And then I had somebody like freak out one time I was on a stream. They're like, "What is that next to you?" That's actually Raiden. He's actually a god. So.
World Combat. I'm more of a Soul Calibur.
I love Soul Calibur. That was the first fighting game I got for Dreamcast. It was a huge fighting game. Obviously, I was a huge fighting game kid because when I got older, I bought a fucking Mortal Kombat arcade. But that was my first one that I would play as.
Okay, I gotta ask, who's your Soul Calibur character?
I wasn't very good, and nor did I play it enough. I was about to go to Tekken for some reason, and say that tiger guy.
That's my character in Tekken.
That's my guy, and yeah, I had to look at a list of characters to see who I played as. It was a girl, I know that.
Taki? Was it Taki? Ninja?
I have to see the name, and I'm gonna do it. I don't know. We have a few minutes. Soul Calibur.
Does anybody?
Because now I'm actually curious. Yeah, Dreamcast. Well, let's go Dreamcast. Because that's the only one I played.
Okay. Yeah, I played all of them. It's been a while though. A friend of mine won a tournament, a Soul Calibur tournament once.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look at it, I guess. You put me on the spot. I know, like, I can give you my Tekken guy was the Tiger dude. And I actually have on the arcade cab, I have Tekken 1, 2, and 3, but it's the PS1 ports because there's a basically like an emulator in here. So I have 3 of the original Mortal Kombat PCBs because I'm like a purist and I don't like emulation, but I also have a box in there that can emulate our old arcade games and PS1 games. So yeah, I got Tekken on there as well, but that's just to kind of try out games before I go buy them or whatever, or the original arcade board.
Real quick, I just got to answer this real quick. So I think it's just incoherent to say that you're not making any ontological claims when stating that you are thinking of certain beliefs. All that is to say that some thinker has some beliefs.
Yeah, we kind of
So,
addressed this already, but yeah, go ahead.
well, one, I would go back to the beginning of the episode where I talk about the cogito, but also keep in mind, I'm not actually making a claim about identity, that I necessarily exist as a self, independent of, like, the reality that I could be describing could just be this thinking.
Well, I would say, let me just ask you. I'll just present this for him this way. If you were in the Matrix, right? What is the the actual real ontological basis here? Like, then what are you doing as the thinking, right? Well, you're still thinking. We didn't remove that. We didn't never strip that part of the cogito away, right? Like, you still have the access to the seeming, or the experience, or whatever you would want to use the term, which goes into, I think that was what you were going into your point about the non-inferential aspect of it, right?
Right.
Yeah. So you wouldn't actually have some, you wouldn't be saying, like, at the end of it, right? Like the fake life, which I guess would be this one. You wouldn't be saying, like, that's the ontology I'm accessing. You would say, no, like, if it's the case, like, I'm going to grant that it could be the case I'm being deceived by Yahweh, right? And
Right.
I'm actually just some rat or something, and this is just going on in my mind. Well, then, yeah, then would still be thinking. It would still have the seeming, the ontology would still apply to what it actually is.
But even if you want to
And the axiom
remove,
still stays intact.
but I'm okay if you want to, even if you want to remove this idea of the I from the whole issue. Like, forget the self. You can still say that, to think is to exist. Something is taking place. I mean, if it's an identity or a totality, like, I'm okay with not knowing with saying that I don't know the ontology behind it.
Yeah, agreed.
I don't think that, honestly, I think it's, I don't think Descartes is referencing an identity the way people think he is.
Well, I wouldn't. I wouldn't say I'd push back on you on that, but I would say, even if he was, I'm more interested in the kind of derivations to the literature or the argument over time, right? And seeing, like, that's why I like seeing Russell's critique of the I and or whatnot. But I've definitely agreed more upon the non-inferential state, because all you're doing when you're using the words is just describing the state. I mean, we could just use some grunt, or I could just say some tautology with qualia or something, maybe, right? I mean, maybe not necessarily qualia, but just some seeming there. So yeah, I don't know. I don't want to get on another tangent, but
anyone have any last questions before we get going? And
sorry, I had a lot of brain farts halfway through my thoughts today. I don't know why.
You're good. No worries. It's taking you a little time to get back into it.
Yeah, it's been. Thank you. That you found an excuse for me to pull out of the excuse bag.
Yeah, I know. Hopefully, we'll be able to come out with more content soon. More steady content in the near future. So
sure. And yeah, well, I guess we'll probably leave it at that. I'll get the stuff ready. If another question pops in by the time of our little in-spiel here, then we'll answer that. I wanted us to, well, first say I'm glad to be back in the seat with my co-host, and
yes,
looking forward to the future and more topics. If you guys have topic ideas, please give them to us, because when we do a show, to pull back the curtain, we kind of just hit each other up and be like, hey, do you want to do this thing? Sometimes we'll go more in depth and get some notes together. Sometimes we'll just wing it, like tonight. With I had the script up and stuff like that. But sometimes we'll take some notes. But if you guys if someone gives us a suggestion in there, we know it's coming, I think that will help us a lot. Kind of think of different ideas to go down, and then also get us to get in the habit of writing the notes and stuff for the shows, make better shows. If you're not subscribed, please go ahead and subscribe. I'd really appreciate that. And then if I want to say, if you're not doing anything on Sunday, you can check me out at Talk Heathen. I'll be doing a show this Sunday, and then the following Sunday, and then I won't be doing one until like late June. and then I have no idea when after that. But yeah, so there's some shows there, and hopefully we can get some viewers from here over there. That'd be pretty cool.
Sounds great.
Not that they need our viewers compared to the amount they have, but it would be nice.
Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, thank you. I'm starting to get a delay now on your side, so I guess it's good. It's the end of the show. All right, yeah, and someone asked in the comments here, got any stumpers for the next precept apologist I run into? I mean, I'll end it on this. I won't say this is necessarily a stumper. I'm going to have some graphic of kind of similar to this kind of an argument. But I find the presuppositional approach asserting something to be like, I kind of use a joke that it seems like, say we're in a classroom and, you know, we have an equation on the board, and we can just analogously say that the equation is representing like the equation of life. Now in the situation, it's just some classmates doing an equation, but analogously, this is figuring out life here. You know, the fundamental metaphysical necessity, the singularity, the God, whatever the fuck you think it is. So Billy Presup stands up in front of the class and goes, I've got the answer to the problem. And the answer is 12. And he goes and he looks around the room and he's like, Sally, what'd you get? Sally Hindu's like, I got 11. And he's like, points to Johnny Agnostic. Johnny Agnostic's like, I don't know the answer. I haven't figured it out yet. Still trying to figure it out. Points to Becky Islam, which that's a good name, I guess, for that. But Becky Islam, or Muslim or whatever, she goes and says, and the answer is 14. And Billy Presup says, you're all wrong because you didn't presuppose my answer, which is 12. Well, sure. I mean, you could do that, right? You could just state I win, or you could actually take an evidentialist approach and fucking solve the equation and do the actual work and actually apply some process at which you get to the answer from a bottom-up approach as opposed to a top-down approach. And so from that perspective, for me, it just seems that all the Presup is doing is inserting a number into the equation and just saying like, that's it. And yeah, I don't think that's a good argument. I think that's something to be weary of. And also, I don't think that we should start with some epistemic authority at which you presuppose, for which you have to also presuppose before the presupposition that it doesn't have a problem of induction as well. So thank you guys for coming out, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.
If I can get the brand thing to work.